Okay. Let me do this. Here. I want to take this. I forgot to put this. All these extra instruments. All right. So how are we doing? I think I want to close that window. It's a little loud coming in here. Yeah. It's a beautiful day. Maybe people are out. Okay. So, greetings everyone. I think, how many? We have 3 people at the moment, perhaps. Yeah, maybe more, but whoever is there, welcome to this. Oh, wait a second. What's happening out? What happened? Yeah? Are we okay? We're okay. Huh?
I started late, so.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Well, as we begin today, I wrote in the introduction about the experience of being here on 2001 9/11 when this it's because I don't have any coffee with me even. I can't. We were interrupted just now a little bit earlier by this warning that we're going to have a water shut off, etc., etc., and everything got confused. So I'm also confused. But anyway, tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. The attack on the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and another one which we don't exactly know where their target was, but perhaps it was the White House or the Capitol building, some prominent building or monument in Washington, D.C. as well. And as I mentioned, that date really marks a great change all of a sudden in I would say even the progress of history in a way, and in quite a terrible way. And it didn't have to be that way, but it ended up really being that way with the response of the United States, which I think was, are you okay with this? Everything is being readjusted, so I'm very much this way. The response of the United States, which was really in a sense, it's not uncalled for, but as I mentioned, rather than trying to bring the world together, oh God, I'm so amazed. Thank you. Now I can actually talk, I think. Oh, it's very good. It's always better than the one I make. Yes, I had my train of thought going, and it's completely now sort of shattered, but I will try to recapture it in a way. So anyway, my own experience before 9/11, even coming up to that, was one of actually a feeling of great promise. Right? There was lots happening in the world, of course, this way, but it seemed that we were on a trajectory where everything was opening up more, and the people of the world somehow were becoming closer. Of course, I was not aware of so many different conflicts, little conflicts brewing sort of under the surface. But in any case, we had this feeling, and I would just say, as a musician at the time, the idea of traveling was very easy, playing everywhere. It was quite wonderful. Now, what happened at 9/11 is we had a complete break in that sense. Although right after it happened, there was this brief opportunity for the world really to come together, as the United States, the victim of this terror attack, had great sympathy even from our so-called opponents around the world, and offers of help, which were spurned. And this, we see, was the beginning of a pattern which has continued in a certain way until just about now, in fact. And also, it seems that the response was completely misdirected. First, directed toward Iraq and Saddam Hussein, despite the fact that Al-Qaeda was an enemy of Saddam Hussein. That's right. Despite the fact that the conflict between the Sunni and Shiites and Alawite and the Ba'ath Party in Iraq was something which actually precluded Iraq supporting an organization such as Al-Qaeda, which was in fact, I think, very, very small at that time. But, okay. And I have to say there was so much, as we found out afterwards, intelligence, information about what was going to happen, even though the CIA and the FBI, et cetera, did not know exactly what would happen. All the people who were involved were marked. Everything was there. And, of course, the administration, George Bush, was completely, well, I would say not even, it's not that they were clueless, but they were not interested in something like that. They were trying to do other things. They were, so this took them by surprise, and the response, going, as I mentioned, to going into Iraq, and then that was something that was completely inappropriate, misdirected, and really changed the world in a terrible way. And what is interesting to me about it is we take the hubris of certain people and how it's in a way just very few people can determine the course of history for so many people. And that's what happened in 9/11, first from the attack, but then from the response. And you had these few people who supposedly were experts, supposedly. Someone like Donald Rumsfeld, who these technocrats who thought that, well, we can move in, we don't need, we are so developed technologically that we can just come into Iraq and change everything, and everything will be fine, and will be a cakewalk, as he said, and then we'll go right out. Of course, that didn't happen, and it was impossible to happen. I just saw an interview with one of my heroes, Noam Chomsky, who's still doing okay. He's I don't know how old he is, but he's a remarkable person. And he had just very present and thoughtful statement when he was talking about the pullout from Afghanistan now, and how it seemed to take the government of the United States by surprise in a certain way, which it, of course, didn't take me by surprise, didn't take most of the world by surprise in a certain sense. And he said that, well, he was asked, well, how come you knew so much more than it seems that the government knew? And he said, that's because I'm just a regular person. So I read the papers, I get information this way. But that by the time in the government, these people, things get filtered from one department to another department to another department, that progressively the message is turned into something which becomes something which the administration, in this case the Biden administration, would like to hear. So, in fact, their information, in a certain sense, which should be all-encompassing, is much less than the information that we have just as regular people. And I've seen that quite often, I must say, in this. And that is partly due to the fact that we all have these, well, I should say, there are different steps in the going up inside a government. This happens in companies also, and there's this so-called expert in each one. Now, this expert knows, and if you know, many times you don't have to find out. And this is very true of what happened after 9/11. And of course, the operation against Al-Qaeda could have and should have been a police operation, basically, with the cooperation of all these governments who wanted to help. And that probably could have resulted in the capture of bin Laden, etc., rather quickly. I don't go into details about the issue of Pakistan and the United States, as well, who are allies, and yet Pakistan was a supporter of Al-Qaeda, of course, and as it is a supporter now of the Taliban. Now, what happened also after 9/11 in the United States was that there was a reaction against immigration. And you had, right before that, there was a great chance that what was called the DREAM Act immigration bill, this was called the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, would have become law, anyway. And it's its first step in a wider, I would say, more rational immigration policy. Now that completely stopped, and after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security in the United States was formed. And what that did was that you had different organizations, or different departments, I should say, the Customs, Immigration, and that was all brought together under one heading, and what you saw was the beginning of detention enforcement efforts. So, as this is one person his name is Isaias Guerrero, an immigrant rights organizer, said that that's when people started getting into deportation proceedings, and this, from that time until now, there was an escalation of this. There's also a demonization of minorities, a demonization of people who didn't look like, I don't know, white Americans, I could say. And a kind of sowing of division in the world. Along with that, you already had, before the 20th century, no, we're in the 21st century, right? Yeah, 2000. Okay, one more coffee. Before the 21st century, already there was great scientific evidence of the dangers of climate change, dangers of global warming, and I've talked about that before. And there was the possibility of addressing that. Now, after 9/11, that all, in a certain sense, was put on hold as well. And we are now 2021, this is 20 years after that, and finally you have the Biden administration taking troops out of Afghanistan. Finally, this was, and don't forget that the beginning of the conflict in Afghanistan was fueled by the United States. This is when the Russians had installed a government in Afghanistan. The United States actually supported the Mujahideen, who actually sort of morphed into the Taliban. Yeah, so again, this was a kind of what should I say? Global conflict between the United States and Russia, earlier between the United States and the Soviet Union, which created this kind of awful collateral damage, as we say, because in fact the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union was something which is a matter of conflict of ideology, a conflict of certain people. They think that, no, this is, and we have to protect ourselves by moving against the influence of the Soviet Union at the time, instead of actually seeing what's happening in the countries where we are basically not invading, but what should we say? Destabilizing. This way. Okay, I have enough of that. I just mentioned also in 2003, and this is in Afghanistan, the Taliban were basically defeated. They had offered to surrender. They wanted to negotiate a treaty. And again, this is the Bush administration on the Rumsfeld and it's Bush himself, etc. They said, we do not negotiate with terrorists. And that actually gave the Taliban the time to regroup, to re-strengthen themselves, to form other alliances, let's say. And we have the situation which we have now today. Also, going back to the interview of Noam Chomsky, where he was asked the question, well, well, I should say that this whole issue of Afghanistan, was this a loss for the United States? Was this a loss? And he said one thing. He said, well, it depends who you were talking about. Because there was easily around $2 trillion which was put into the effort in Afghanistan, and you wonder where that money went. And of course, that meant that certain groups and certain people became very, very wealthy. And another thing he was mentioning is that this is the discussion here often seemed to center around, well, you know, the United States has lost its global initiative. It's lost this, it's lost that. But there's very little discussion about the actual people in Afghanistan. That's right. This is the United States. All right, I can keep going, and I'm sort of rambling on, but I will change to more contemporary kind of issues, but it's in a way connected, because what we saw also after 9/11 was the idea that, and it was even said, well, you had people going into Iraq, for instance, right after the United States routed the Iraqi army, which was ready to be routed, in fact, after so many years of sanctions. And the people would go in who were completely inexperienced, not knowing, they'd say, well, we are going to make Iraq into a democracy. And they say, well, we will create the news. We will create truth. Anyway, we will, whatever. And that was not, of course, the beginning of the era of fake news, but it sort of spurred the idea that what is important is not what is actual, but what can be impressed on the media. That's right. Okay, we come now today, and I segue to January 6th and the riot, the basically attack on the Capitol building and the Congress of the United States. Now, the House of Representatives trying to make a bipartisan committee to investigate this. Now, that was first blocked by both the Senator McConnell and also the Representative McCarthy, who is the minority head of the House of Representatives. That's so. But this, what should I say? Nancy Pelosi, who is the House Speaker of the House, anyway, has organized a committee. Oh, once again, I'm sorry. Here, let's put this away. Oh, no, okay. And put this here. That's all right. So she has organized a committee, and luckily, at least 2 Republicans were willing to join, and this is after McCarthy appointed 2 who had refused to be there. This was on purpose, of course. Is something the matter? Yeah? Okay. So, there's 2 Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, are part of the committee now, and the committee is trying to begin investigations, and now they've asked for records from a wide variety of sources, including what should I say, telecommunications records from companies such as Verizon, T-Mobile, etc., for records of communications of of people, including members of Congress, who perhaps are implicated in the January 6th riot. Now, what's kind of so interesting, I always say interesting, it's not interesting, it's ridiculous, in fact. Now, McCarthy has now claimed that any company which turns over private information to that committee is in violation of federal law and subject to losing, as he said, their ability to operate in the United States. Now, that's although there is no law of that sort on any books in the United States. This is simply a kind of trying to strong-arm the companies. And now 11 House Republicans wrote a letter to Yahoo, the company. They even addressed it to the CEO, the former CEO who left the company way before this all happening, so you can understand how informed they are, or how unserious, I would say this is. Warning, they said that the undersigned, these 11 House Republicans, do not consent to the release of confidential call records or data. And they say your company has a legal obligation to protect the data of your subscribers and customers. And if you fail to comply with these obligations, we will pursue all legal remedies. And then McCarthy also mentioned, he said, if companies still choose to violate federal law, which of course doesn't exist, remember, a Republican majority, and he's hoping, of course, that will be the case already, perhaps in 2 years, and that will not forget and will stand with Americans to hold them fully accountable under the law. It's really remarkable. Now, you have this one representative, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has warned, they said, any company complying with the committee's request will be shut down. This is really incredible. And this is after the committee that the Republicans before had organized to investigate Hillary Clinton and Benghazi. This is all this completely sort of fabricated problems that you had. They subpoenaed private records from Clinton. So they, of course, this law that doesn't exist, of course, were completely in violation themselves. And this is what we see happening now in general, where, as I've mentioned so many times, the idea is simply to attack. And if you yourself are guilty of something, instead of admitting the guilt or whatever, you try to shove it onto someone else. That's it, basically. So this is very dangerous, because we see here really the breakdown of any kind of democratic process. And let's hope that we can get out of this, because the consequences, not only for the United States, but for the world, will be very great. And with that, we see that the Biden administration has been losing support in the polls, so to speak, and we don't really know the accuracies of these polls. We don't know how they're skewed in one way or the other. But it has a lot to do with the resurgence of COVID-19 infections, although it does have something to do with the pullout from Afghanistan, which would have been actually considerably worse had it had the timeline which the Trump administration put in place for the withdrawal not been extended by a few months at least. So here the Biden administration is being made, but especially for the COVID-19 infection, is held responsible for this, while in fact you have people in governmental positions in different states who are actively, in a way, trying to somehow, what is happening? Some kind of sound. I was wondering, someone's coming to take me away. That's actively, actually, promoting more cases of the virus in a way. They're sort of trying to stand in the way of any kind of measures which will ameliorate the virus. And with that, I have to mention here that this week, the United States suffered an average of 1,500 COVID-19 deaths a day, which is the most deaths since March. And on average, they say 152,000 Americans have tested positive for COVID-19 each day nationwide over the past 2 weeks. This is ridiculous and did not have to be this way at all. As I'm reading now, perhaps that was a little bit of an improvement, because 2 weeks before that, there were 160,000 a day were testing positive for COVID-19. And the point is that these increases are clustered in very few states. That is, they are Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, Ohio, West Virginia. There's Texas and Arizona and Florida are still not doing well, but they have actually come down from the peaks of infections at the moment. We'll see if that continues or not. Okay. Now, what you still have with this, for instance, this just a few days ago, there's Boise, Idaho. The place which I like so much, actually. I'm such a big fan of Boise, but there's a charter school. It's called Peace Valley Charter School in Boise, and there was a protocol there that students must wear masks, and that was just revoked, even though in Idaho you do have a spike in Delta variant COVID-19 infections. Now, what happened was this. the school board decided to hold a separate meeting, virtual meeting, with several doctors, including one pathologist whose name was Ryan Cole, who had been appointed to the District Board of Health in August of 2021. Now, Cole then was selected after he spoke at the White Coat Summit in Dallas, Texas, which was hosted by a pro-Trump organization, America's Frontline Doctors. It's a group of doctors and nurses who are opposed to the vaccines and mask mandates. And at the event, Cole referred to the vaccine. He says it's an investigational vaccine. He called it a clot shot. And he also said that getting a vaccine is like needle rape. This is kind of remarkable kind of thing. And he said that, the vaccine causes diseases itself. He said, we are injecting, as he said, this is a quote from him, something into the human body that is the toxin. It is the toxin. It causes the disease. It isn't a vaccine. Now, a vaccine is, of course, I could say a disabled virus, basically, or bacterial, which allows the body's immune system to then recognize an active virus so that it can actually counter it before the virus does damage. That is the principle of vaccine. So it's right. Although he says a toxin, I don't know what he means exactly by a toxin if it's not the virus itself. So this fellow, who's supposedly a doctor, he's simply an ideologue. And he was a big supporter of the drug Ivermectin, which is very much in the news. And what we find, though, and finally, there is actually a large randomized trial of ivermectin, which shows that it has no effect at all. I wanted to speak about medicines just a little bit, because the idea of repurposing an older medicine for something new is actually a very worthwhile idea, very important idea, in fact. But the issue of ivermectin, which is an anti-parasite medicine, which has been very important for, as I also mentioned, curing river blindness in Africa. It's been, and of course for parasite infections in livestock, in horses, etc. Has really no connection with the disease symptoms of COVID-19 or the disease or the disease itself, what it is. Now, there are drugs, and there are two in particular, which I think will be getting FDA approval. One is called fluvoxamine, and it's an antidepressant, but also an anti-inflammatory drug. And anti-inflammatories have been tested a lot because a big issue with the COVID-19 is the body's, I would say, outsized inflammatory response to the infection, which causes terrible trauma. And it finds out that this drug, actually taken very early, this is in a randomized trial with several hundred people. They say only a small percentage taken early ended up in the hospital. So this is something which actually will work in the very or early stages. Now, ivermectin was also this in the earliest studies of ivermectin, which were done simply in petri dishes and in test tubes, was thought maybe to have some mild effect very early. Of course, that was blown up, and people even on death's door are demanding to take ivermectin, which has absolutely no effect at all. Okay, then there's another steroid, which is called Budesonide, and that is also something which has shown to actually reduce the inflammatory response very early, which, I should say, this cascading inflammatory response, which will lead people to have to be hospitalized. So these are two very interesting old medicines, which are very cheap and will be very useful. And perhaps had something like ivermectin not become so prominent in the press and in social media, etc., these other drugs would have become more, what should we say? I mean, the FDA is looking at them, but all that process may have been, in fact, somehow accelerated. Anyway. But those drugs are completely under the radar. I just found out about them by just sort of randomly going in some medical sites and just looking, da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, look, this is interesting. And another thing is nasal sprays are being tested as kind of blockers for the virus. And this is something that the CDC is not, and FDA are asking for more information about, because they don't see clear evidence that it actually blocks the virus, but maybe just reduces early symptoms, but may not reduce the overall progress of the disease. But these are also interesting things. And what is, for me, important about all these is that these are all medicines which have a very simple and logical possible connection with the disease. While something like ivermectin really is very much out of any kind of sort of simple connection, I should say. Well, I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. Okay, I go enough of that, and I'm no expert at any of this stuff, but it's just crazy. Okay. So, Yeah, okay. But this I will do later. And yet, but I want to just go to two other things. And first, this is something I just found out today, has to do with frog foam. And I think it's cute and also interesting. So it's a study in the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. And it turns out that when frogs mate, they create a foamy substance which preserves and protects the eggs. And this was, this was just now published in the Royal Society Open Science. It's a journal that this similar kind of foam was produced in the laboratory, and what they say is that this can give us, as one of the authors of the study said, give us a really nice, safe delivery vehicle that can be administered to patients without any fear of making them sick, outside of many other synthetic delivery vehicles. What this means is you can embed a medicine in this foam, and it will be released in a very gradual way, you see. So it can be very good for insulin, for different kind of antimicrobial things where you can actually give a larger dose of something and have it released in a measured form. And this foam will not make people sick, apparently, that way. So this is another thing that just comes from looking at our fellow forms of life in the world and getting information from them. So we wouldn't think that frogs could give us information, but in fact they do. Now the last thing is, this is something that I'm embarrassed that I didn't know about, actually, and this has to do with Robert Carter III, who was a very prominent slaveholder at the time of the American Revolution. He was the patriarch, as it says, of one of the wealthiest families in Virginia. He owned many, many slaves. And what he did, this is September 5th, 1791, he wrote what he called the Deed of Gift, which freed more than 500 slaves. And not only did he free them, he gave them means of income, means of support. And he's someone who I didn't know, and I think most people don't know about as well. And this is also, for me, interesting and fascinating and embarrassing for me. Now, his friends, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, for instance, they all had doubts about slavery. They held slaves, but they were very skeptical about the possibility of simply freeing slaves. So someone like Jefferson, who wrote about the evil of slavery, however he held slaves, and he only freed 10 slaves, I believe. And this is way after Robert Carter freed his slaves. He even wrote, he said that they was worried that to abolish the institution would have grave societal and economic consequences. And this was the problem that he couldn't get around. He says, as it is, we have the wolf by the ear. We can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, self-preservation in the other, he wrote. And this was several years after Carter's deed of gift. Now, Robert Carter, and let me see if I get just a picture of him. Yeah. Here we are. 1 second. Yeah. This was something was on CNN, which I just picked up. This is painting of the young Robert Carter. Okay. Yeah. Now, what impressed me most is Carter was not at all in politics. He was not at all a public person, but he was tremendously wealthy. He had huge tracts of land in Virginia. But simply as a private individual who had tremendous moral misgivings, who had this sense of the evil of slavery, he simply decided to free his slaves and don't forget, this is in 1791. And this is the largest number of slaves who were freed before Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, I could say. This way. So he freed his slaves, and not only freed them, but provided from his great wealth the means for the former slaves to not simply subsist, but to improve their condition. And this could have been a blueprint for the emancipation of slavery, for the abolition of slavery. But the people who are in the public light were too concerned with the idea of society as it stood, the idea of this, and what can we do, because if we dismantle this, there will be chaos or something. While Robert Carter, as just a private citizen, could actually affect something which had dramatic effect on the people who were in bondage. So we don't know about Carter because he was not in the public light. but he was simply a moral person who did what he could do to right what he thought was a terrible wrong. Okay. Now with that, I've done a lot of rant today, and it's just thinking so much about the tragedy of 9/11. And again, this has to do also with the sort of people in the public eye who think that both they know and they can only act in certain ways because of this and that and the other thing, who are totally, in fact, misinformed. I move to music now. Oh, I should keep this here because I want to do this. And you wonder, why do I do these rants? That's why. And I think that's because as musicians and as performers, we have to be, I don't know, what should I say? We have to think that our performance or that culture itself can lead to the betterment of humankind. It hasn't always happened that way, and of course, culture can be used and abused. But basically, I think culture is what people we should say not what people do, but which is sort of the essence of humanity. Now, even we take this slavery and slave culture, for a way, led to huge innovation, huge should I say progress in the artistic world. Anyway, it's so we owe an incredible debt of gratitude, as everybody in the world, to this culture, slave culture. I've talked about that much earlier. There's something. Okay, so we go to music, and as performers, and now the sort of nitty-gritty, what shall we do, how shall we perform, etc., etc. And I want to go back to, I have to take a look at where it is, because I got myself mixed up a little. Yeah, here we are. All these suggestions that I have. Okay, one thing I I've talked about warming up in different ways. One suggestion was, as a young student, suggestion for a topic was, as a young student, what mistakes you could have avoided if you know what you know today. Many, many mistakes. It's always that way. Who's your favorite clarinet player and why? That's a very difficult question, which maybe I'll answer another time, because my parents, and especially my father, who was a clarinetist, wonderful clarinetist, he, though educated me in music, not through the clarinet, but through performers of other instruments and composers. That's it. That's why from very early on, he introduced me to all sorts of new music. I mean, starting with Stravinsky, ending with Boulez when I was just a toddler, that way. So clarinet player, that's in different. I am was not influenced, but excited by various jazz clarinet players. I was excited by some folk clarinet players. That's very good from the Balkan areas. Turkish clarinet players that way. And I think at some point probably I will speak about that and the connection with classical music this way. What's another one? Uh-oh. Because we have a lot of construction going on. History of your clarinet setting, my mouthpiece, my reeds. That's totally uninteresting. So I won't bother with that now. And other things. Okay, but what there's also a topic. Can you actually hear me now, or is it just too?
Yeah, it's very distracting.
It's very distracting. Yeah, I'm wondering how much that will be. Okay, but the one topic was that breathing airflow. I talked about that a bit. Now I want to go on from that and reiterate and probably expand on this whole notion of what I call whole body playing. Uh-oh. I don't know if we can continue with this. Is it too distracting?
It's okay, we still can hear you.
Yeah? Okay, I continue a little bit and we'll see if this works or not. Okay. So, I've mentioned here, I go up now and want to finally a subject that I really know about, perhaps. Though who knows if I really know or not. So, the idea of that your whole body, whoa, it's distracting to me. Oh gosh, I don't know if we should sort of cut this short perhaps now and continue. Well, I talk just a little bit about how we should not simply think it, but we should feel the shape of phrases with our whole body. And when I play, that the air moves, but if I'm playing, for instance, let's see if this works. This is very, very soft reed. You're wondering about my setup. Yeah, maybe someday I will actually talk to you about that, but I think it's not interesting. Yeah, not that. Okay, anyway, so my teacher, Ryashinov, and I've spoken, I've had these exercises to feel rhythm. And rhythm, of course, is essential. That's, I would say, the fundamental sort of parameter, or I should say, or paradigm, that of music. You have dynamics, you have a pitch, etc., but rhythm is at the center of everything. So he had this. So you would play a scale, and you figure you squeeze, lift. Let's say if you're playing quarter, you do that on the eighth notes. And I've progressed with this and sort of added things like you can do in different rhythms. Now the question now is with dynamics. So if I'm playing, for instance, and I make I feel that in rhythm, and I feel that in rhythm in my fingers. And we asked about warming up. And the people warm up with long tones, and they have different, so they play a strong, they play a crescendo, they play diminuendo. I have something I call creative long tones, where you play a very different kind of melodic phrase on one note, which can have many, many dynamics. So here I play, this annoying D. I don't know why is it a D. It's crazy, but. So instead of just playing one thing here, you play different rhythms. So, oh, good. For instance, you can do different kind of patterns, different ones. And I asked students to actually write out several different, I call them dynamic melodies. Oh, here we go again. That's right. But the question is, how do we feel this? And the feeling is what is most important. And I feel very much in my fingers. So if I'm playing, well, first let's say a simple arc in 4/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4. That way, I feel in the fingers 1, 2, 3, 4. Even though I'm just playing one note. If I'm playing, let's say again, something, let's say here with just the left hand, I will even feel in the other fingers this way. You can probably see what I'm doing. Not right. So it's as if I'm conducting myself as I'm playing this way. And the feeling in my fingers is transmitted to the air, to the embouchure, to what's called support, and as I always mention, to my feet as well. So if I'm doing, I feel my feet in rhythm. And if I do a creative long tone, this way, I'm also feeling that in my fingers. Okay. And so I go on just a tiny bit now, since we have this terrible D tyranny in the background. I want to look at also how the finger working with the air will create expression in this. I bet how it creates rhythm, how it creates anticipate dynamics, etc., etc. And with that, I want to start, just do a little bit with this wonderful work, Andante Allegro of Ernest Chausson. Here, that is a bit. Unfortunately, there's no really decent edition of the piece, but that's a very different subject. But that's, and actually beside the point. But what I want to do is just highlight one thing. It is that this first part, which is marked long, the slow tempo, and going into the initial melody, we have this going after that one. And I'm talking about this now, like because I actually had to teach it a bit recently, and to have people feel what the expression of this should be. I realize that they have to really feel in the hands. So we have I squeeze, and then here I open the hand and I feel it's what I call anti-squeeze. And there's this another one. T, 2, 3, 1. And then the melody itself, which is that way, and it moves on, but the fact of that it has this sense of pulling here, we have to feel in our hands. So that interval, I feel in my finger. Even there, it's not. It's that, And there, I feel it in my left hand, as well as the right. And there too, I feel a heat, and even though my right hand is basically up, I feel that as well. That, whoops. We have this drone on D, although I should transpose the piece. So there, so we always think that the air should do this, should move, should feel the connection of interval, etc. But I think it's the fingers that actually initiate the air, the blowing of the air. So. And there too I go T, da, da. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of an idea of this, and there are exercises you can do. So you can play a scale where you go 1 and this way. So you make the crescendo, feel that in your finger. One, squeeze, and the air moves with that. Can you see my hands at all? And going back down too. So this is a variation of my teacher, Leon Roshanov's exercise of feeling rhythm. So I got, and so there I squeeze the thumb and lift the finger. There I squeeze this and lift. And you can do the opposite. You can make a diminuendo. And I feel a different way in the way I'm moving my finger. Yeah. So this is sort of an outline of the basis of expressive technique. Let's say how you feel the expression of rhythm in a physical way. Now, old teacher Daniel Bonad had this legato fingering, so you do. And the problem I find with that, it was simply mechanical, so that you go slow this way there. Not connected with the musical sense. Okay, so I think this is very annoying. So I'm gonna stop my little speech here, and next time, whenever that will be, I will not have such a huge harangue, perhaps in the beginning, but considering that tomorrow is in a way a special day that has to live in infamy, I felt I needed to do this. I moved to a little, perhaps, surprise. It's a performance which I gave with the fantastic pianist Pascal Devoyant of the Andante and Allegro of Chausson. And I hope you enjoy it. And I think that it's going through the computer so you don't hear this. Yeah, so at least that will be a little better. Okay? Take care, everyone.
Say bye to the trail.